Howdy, with this video I want to go over the reading for next Monday's discussion board, Plato's Allegory of the Cave, or Myth of the Cave as sometimes called. Just to introduce you to it real quick, then go over two of the major philosophical questions we're going to deal with throughout the course. It's not a philosophy course, but we're going to apply these questions to many of the readings we're going to be getting into. But we're also going to be looking at readings in historical context and critical context and other ways. So it's not just going to be a philosophy class. But these two philosophical questions will form the kind of the basis for the final exam, so kind of want you to be thinking about them as we go through the semester. But first, Plato's Myth of the Cave, Allegory of the Cave. You're going to see right away he develops this image of prisoners in a cave, and they're kind of tied down here. They're down here, down at the bottom left, and bound and forced to look at the wall and look at these shadows created by other people behind them who are manipulating the images. And they're looking at the shadows on the wall trying to figure out what reality is. And they're just kind of arguing with each other. Plus these people behind them are yelling at them too. So they're never quite sure what the images are and who's talking. But they're looking at the wall, looking at these shadows, trying to figure out what's going on in their lives. And what Socrates is kind of saying is that that's kind of how we live our lives. If you've never seen a dialogue from Plato before, basically you're going to have just characters talking to each other. And this one is Socrates, the great philosopher. The unexamined life should not be, it's not worth living and all that good stuff. But Socrates never wrote anything down, so Plato came behind him and kind of uses him as a character in his in these dialogues, even though he's a real person as well. And he's talking to Glaucon, this up-and-coming young man, and we're kind of like Glaucon trying to follow Socrates as he's talking to us. Usually the dialogue, Socrates is going after somebody who has a dopey idea, and Socrates just kind of reveals it. But here he's very nice to Glaucon and trying to help him see what the nature of truth is. And he's saying, hey, this is the way people live their lives. They're just stuck, looking at these shadows on the wall. And if you think about social media, that's kind of what we do on social media, right? We don't know who's created a lot of the content. It's just these images being flashed at us and trying to get us to buy stuff or think a certain way. And we're just kind of looking at the shadows on our phone or our computers, trying to figure out what reality is without really knowing exactly what's happening, even though we think we know what's happening. And what Socrates is going to say is like, what happens if we can pull one of these prisoners out of the cave, drag them out, pull them up here, get them into the light of the good, the sun, the good, reality. And once you first pull a person up there, they're not going to be happy. They're going to be blinded by the light. They're going to be physically uncomfortable, and they're going to miss their cave world. But eventually, if they can, keep them out here, keep them looking at the good, struggling for the good, eventually they'll see the world as it really is, and they'll live in the light. And also, once the person lives in the light, they'll also want to come back down here and get other people out of the cave and bring them up to the good as well. If you think about the analogy of a drug addiction, people who are addicted to drugs live in this cave world of the drug culture. You got dealers and other social media and everything reinforcing the drug culture. So they're living in this cave world where they're looking at the shadows on the wall made by people manipulating them to keep them in that drug culture and keep them addicted. But if we can pull one of these addicts out of here, drag them up out into the light of the good, of reality, of sobriety in this case, they're going to hate it at first because their bodies are going to physically react with DTs and everything. They got to go through the withdrawals. Also, you lose all your friends. Generally, people who are addicted to drugs don't want to deal with somebody who just got off of them. Because that's not part of their cave world, right? But this person will sober up and eventually see life as it should be, the reality of the good, and be happy about that. But you're going to see Socrates also says, but then this person's going to want to come back down here and try and get other people out of the cave, and that's going to create its own problem, because if you come out of the light and go back into the dark cave, you're going to appear blind to all these people down here, like you lost your mind. And we don't like our shadow worlds messed with too much. If you think about people like Jesus or Muhammad or Gandhi or Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, we don't like people messing with our shadow worlds. All the men I just mentioned did not die of natural deaths, right? They They didn't die of old age. So we can react quite violently to people who mess with our shadow worlds. So it's a very interesting image, but hopefully seeing a visual of it helps you understand what's happening. If you just jump into a dialogue, you can get lost pretty quickly. But an image helps quite a bit. And the two philosophical questions. Oops, sorry. Again, we're going to be working with these throughout the semester. This isn't a philosophy class, but it kind of helps to see the literature in different contexts. And one of this is going to be this philosophical context. The first big philosophical question we're going to work with is this question of truth versus relativism. You see our culture battling with this, right now. So an essentialist like Plato is going to believe that there's truth out there, that we can apprehend truth and live by truth, and that should be one of the goals of our lives. You don't always have to believe in truth, but or live by a certain truth, but you still might believe the truth is out there. So an essentialist is going to be there's reality you can live with. You go out and gain knowledge so you can live better in that reality and live closer to the truth. If you believe in truth, you're probably going to believe in some moral absolutes. Truth has to have a moral manifestation as well, right? So you have something like the 5 pillars or the 10 commandments that you want to live by to help get you closer to that truth. An anti-essentialist is going to see the world much differently. Instead of truth, everything's kind of relative. Instead of reality, it's you just have everybody's perception, and this perception can be based on how you're raised. It may not be real. It's just maybe stuff your parents told you, or how your family functioned. It may just be what your culture tells you is true, but it may not actually be true. In other words, like me as a 58-year-old white male, I have a certain version of reality that I live in, but it may be much different from, say, a teenager from a different race and a different gender and a different culture, who's different, working with a different reality. So who's right? We have much different realities. We have our own perception of the world, but whose is going to turn out to be the right one? And to an anti-essentialist, it's like, well, no one's, right? Everything's kind of relative. It's based on the individual and how you interpret the world, and that's fine. So instead of knowledge, you might just be getting an indoctrination. You hear some of the talk radio folks say, when you go to public school, you're being indoctrinated, right? You're not getting knowledge. They're taking you away from the truth. But an anti-essentialist is going to say, well, that's pretty much what education is anyway. It's kind of this bias, this indoctrination based on certain people's perception. Your teacher may teach you the same way they were taught, right? There's no real reality based in that. It's just passing down what we might call tradition, but an anti-essentialist would just call it, the old biases. To an anti-essentialist, morality is going to depend on the context. You might have some ideas about morality, but how you actually apply them is going to be based on what situation you find yourself in. So in that sense, if you lose your job, you don't have money, and you can't feed your family, is it wrong to steal to feed your starving children, right? Moral absolutes would say, yes, thou shalt not steal, but the context may say, like, hey, I'm not going to sit there and watch my kids starve to death, right? Especially if I take somebody who has plenty of food. How's that wrong? And you start getting into these interesting moral dilemmas. So to an anti-essentialist, nothing wrong with these the moral, with these moral ideas, but they're more like suggestions to kind of consider. But you have to also consider the context you're living in. So you get some very fascinating questions. If you're studying history, is it relaying facts and it's something essential about what happened in the past? Or is history just his story? Like it was. It's the way my textbooks were particularly in high school back in the 80s. You never knew women even existed in the history books for the most part, or black people, or Asian Americans, or Hispanic Americans. It's just dead white guys did it all. Are you picking up just certain people's biases? Is it the creation of a narrative more than a relating facts? Same thing with journalism. Do journalists report facts, or do they create narratives? Donald Trump's got a lot of mileage off this idea of fake news, right? And kind of reveals some of the news to be a little biased in some ways. But it's fascinating fascinating dynamic, especially in our current culture. We're battling these things out, trying to figure out where we're at with all this. But even if you believe in truth, you still got a lot of work to do. Where does that truth come from? Does it come from tradition? If you're a conservative, what are you conserving? Probably, some traditions from the past, but where did they come from? Does truth come from a deity? If it does, how does that God or gods bring that truth to us? Is it through a book? Is it through some kind of internal manifestation, this inner voice that we have? If it's through a book, something like the Bible that comes in translation, which translation has the most truth in it? Who gets to interpret it? Who decides what that truth is? How's it handed down to us? It gets really complicated, right? Does truth come through science? If it comes through science, how does that jive? If that doesn't jive with what you're seeing in a religious text, how does that work out? If it comes through personal experience, what if that personal experience is in conflict with science or, a religious doctrine? So it can be fascinating to get into. We're going to see it with our early readings in the course. People addressing this idea of truth in different ways, trying to figure out where it comes from, how we can live by it. Then later readings, we're going to start move towards this anti-essentialist side, where the writer's going to start poking at us a little bit, and if this is true over here, but it's not true over here, is it actually true anywhere? Kind of questions. And again, the idea is not to get you to think differently than you do already, but hopefully literature gives you an inroad into thinking more profoundly about things and examining your life a little bit and saying, well, why do I think that's true, or why don't I think that's true? How can you just really be total relativist and make it through life? The other big question is this question of whether or not we have free will, or our lives determined by forces kind of beyond our control. If you believe in free will, and the first one, it's hard to, where's previous screen? Hold on. Oh, last week. Here we go. It's hard to be both of these at the same time, right? Some people try. We're going to see a couple of authors trying to do that and struggling quite a bit. With the next one, you're kind of on a spectrum, where you might, if you believe in free will, you believe your choices kind of determine your lives and who you are. And if you make good choices, good things happen. Bad choices, bad things happen. But determinism is kind of brings into this question of how much is your free will limited by various forces in your life, various factors in your life. If you ever meet me in person, you're going to take one look at me and realize I probably was never a professional basketball player. I'm short. I'm not coordinated. I don't have very good eyes. I have to watch the ball when I dribble, so I'm always kind of bouncing a little bit as I dribble. And I could have practiced basketball every day for my entire life, and I'd never be particularly good at it. And if you looked at my parents, you'd go like, "Oh, well, that's why. They're kind of short, and they don't have very good eyes, and it's just not their game." I didn't choose to be this way. People don't choose to get genetic diseases passed down to them, or baldness, or whatever's going on in your lives. Genetics plays a pretty powerful role in our lives, and we have no choice over that, right? And how much do they limit our lives? Same thing with class. How much money you have, or how much money your parents had, has a major influence on the choices you have in your life, and it can limit your choices. Probably a lot of you, when considering a college, were not thinking UC Berkeley, Harvard, Oxford. You probably had to think about how much money you had and where you could afford to go. Same thing with my children now. They're getting ready to go to college, and they're suffering from the fact that their father's a mid-level government employee who can't afford to send them to wherever they might want to go. They got to go where they can afford to go. So how much money you have has a major influence, and can limit and modify the choices in your life. If you're born a certain race, certain gender, that can have a major influence on how people see you, what people expect from you, how you're treated in life, right? Biology, who you're attracted to, what your body needs to live, is very important. You're not going to be worried about your free will too much if we don't feed you for 3 or 4 days, right? Your body's going to be telling you, I need food now, don't care about anything else. Same thing with sex drives and who you find attractive and who you love. How's all that work? Is it all really about choice? It gets to be kind of a very interesting question. Same thing with environment and culture. If you're raised in a family where there's a lot of trauma, that's going to affect you as an adult. It's not something you have choice over, but it still affects you and how you behave and how you see yourself. And people can tell you like you need to choose to do something different. It's like, but there's something inside me that's just pushing me in a certain way. Same thing if you're born American in the 21st century. You have certain expectations of the world that people maybe in other countries or other cultures don't have. That's one interesting thing about traveling around, even within our country. Going from the Mid-South to, say, the West Coast, it could be kind of a culture shock, right? People have different expectations. So how much choice do we really have? How much free will do we really have? It's kind of an interesting question. Generally, you don't say you don't have any. Some of our authors might move in that direction. But it's certainly limited in some ways. So where do you kind of fall within that kind of that spectrum? And when you combine these two, you're going to see our authors having a lot of fun, pushing us in different directions. So sometimes if you're feeling uncomfortable within a work, it might be because they're kind of poking at your concept of truth or relativism, either way, or questioning this this element of determinism. And you see this battle in our culture all over the place. And I'd rather not give it too many examples because we're going to talk about it all semester. But a while back, a woman drowned her children. I think she had 5 children. I can't remember. Killed one of them, drowned the others in the bathtub because of postpartum depression, and it created all these questions about moral absolute. Oops, crap. Sorry. There we go. Is the moral absolute of thou shalt not kill, does that apply here? Or is she suffering from these biological hormonal problems where she's in such a deep depression that she can't really discern reality and morality? So is she responsible for her actions if she's not competent, particularly to stand trial? So does morality start depending on the context? Apparently the woman was abused by her husband and had all these different problems, physical problems that she really didn't necessarily have too much control over. So how's that moral absolute hold up? And are we going to find her guilty of murder, or are we going to figure out something else to deal with her? Does she need mental health care? But she still did these acts. So all of a sudden it's like, and then we start fighting and all kinds of fun stuff. And that's what our authors are going to start doing with us a little bit. They're going to take us in different directions. You're going to see Plato taking us in the direction of truth. But probably as you're reading, you're going to wonder, is it really that easy? Just, get out of the cave into the light and life's good. Or does, knowing truth create other issues for you? And how limited are you in your ability to get out of your cave world by all these deterministic influences? And all kinds of interesting questions to make it all complicated and hopefully fun, or at least interesting. And again, the idea is not to tell you what to think about all this, but hopefully examining literature helps us examine our lives with a little more clarity, and living the good life takes a little practice, right? That's something else Plato gets into. But lots to get started with. Again, want to kind of introduce that. And again, those 2 philosophical questions, those are great final exam questions. Take 2 or 3 works and discuss the concept of truth versus relativism within those 3 works, or take 3 works that we've read this semester and discuss this idea of determinism versus free will within those 3 works. It's kind of a heads up there. There's some other good questions coming up too. But if you have any questions about it all, hopefully that helps you get into Plato and why we're reading Plato. But we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.